Hi, everyone. I'm Adrian. That's Jay and Philip. We're from Audio Excellence Canada. I'm glad you can join us. I hope you and your family are doing well. Today, we're really, really happy, privileged, and glad to have Dan D'Agostino of D'Agostino Master Audio Systems join us via Skype. As many of you will know about Dan and his achievements, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Dan, thanks for joining us. How are you?
My pleasure. I'm very good. Nice
You,
talking to you.
Thank you. And you're in sunny Arizona, as I understand it.
Yes, I am. We're going to probably have an 85-degree day today.
Man, don't feel sorry for us. We're just freezing cold here. Well,
That's why I'm out of that area.
I was going to say you lived for many years in Connecticut, so you're no stranger to cold.
No. I want to forget about those days, though.
I to do preparation for this, I had read a bunch of articles. You actually did an interview with somebody, and you said you moved to Arizona, and once you moved there, you could actually think better because you weren't always fighting with the cold.
It's very, very true. It's just, I mean, for my personality, the sunshine just has a very soothing effect on me. If I wake up in the morning and it's sunny, I feel good. I want to go outside. I want to do things. I'm raring to go. But when it's cold and I have to put on, 6 layers of cold clothing and gloves and a hat because I'm pretty bald, I need a hat. And so that doesn't appeal to me, even if it's sunny out. But going out in a warm environment is kind of nurturing to my brain, and it still is.
Did you notice? I'm noticing anyway. When I was younger, the cold weather never really seemed to bother me. But as you get older, it's like, oh my God, another cold day, and your fingers are freezing, and this is terrible.
Oh yeah, when I was in my 20s and I lived in Buffalo, I never bothered me. I could go out in a light jacket and be cold and didn't really matter. I mean, you remember skiing when you were young. You could ski. They didn't have ski garb in the 60s. They had very little ski stuff. So you skied in jeans and a jacket with a pair of gloves on. So you were pretty cold up in the hills in Buffalo where it was 10 degrees. And, it was skiing on a lot of ice. But, I did it once and I said, that's it for me.
Well, so then let's maybe go back sort of to the beginning, if you will. How did you get started in the audio industry, and when was that?
Well, I think I've been in the audio industry for a really long time, probably since the early 70s. But my dad really started me way back when I was like 14 years old, when he got interested in audio equipment. And my dad was a machinist, so he wasn't like rolling in dough, but he was able to buy the components to build a klipsch horn in a plywood box that his friend helped him build. And he had that, and he had the Lafayette radio, two integrated amplifier, and I mean, and it played really loud, and I mean, it was a big system for the day. But I kind of got interested in it because the music, he played a lot of old recordings and a lot of 50s stuff, and it was really, really, I loved the music, and we used to listen all the time, and used to tell me about the bands and the singers, and I really enjoyed that. And really, really, it really never left me. I think it's just the love of music and all kinds of music.
So when you started in the 70s, what was the first, I guess, job or occupation in audio that was directly related to the industry?
Well, I worked in a store for a while after I got out of school in Buffalo, Transcendental Audio. And I worked there for a while looking at high-end gear and fixing a lot of it because, boy, in those days, high-end stuff just meant it broke all the time. It sounded really good when it worked, but it didn't live long. I mean, when you think about the first phase linear 700s that came out and stuff, and they were like crazy powerful for the time, but they broke a lot, and I used to fix them in the store and sell them, and I fixed a lot of English stuff, some quad stuff, and some what was the name of that one company I'm trying to think of? It'll come to me. But anyhow, a lot of stuff like that I fixed and got really interested in the high end part of the audio game. And then of course I met Mike Wright, who we both know. Is he still around?
I have to find out. I last time I heard from him was about 3 years ago. He's a bit of recluse, as you know.
Oh, yeah, always
Uh,
has.
yeah, yeah. So it's not easy to go see him or talk to him, but it's been at least 3 years. So how did you meet up with him?
Well, we imported his speaker at the store, and then I met him, and he and I became friends. Because we talked a lot about theory and how things worked, and became friends. And then he offered me a job way back when he first got acquired by Lee Instruments.
So for everybody out there, Mike Wright had a company back then called Dayton Wright, and I guess some of his most famous products were his electrostatic speakers, which were humongous, took a huge amount of power to drive, but when they worked, they were really rugged. And I actually know a client who is a collector. He actually has something like 7 or 8 pairs of them, and he restores them and he builds them, and it's just a big passion of his. Yeah,
Yeah,
so that was in the early days. Yeah.
yeah, and those were pretty amazing. And the fact is that every time I ever listened to those, um, they always sounded great, even in today's standards. Those were really something special. And I don't think anyone ever made electrostat that sounds like that.
Mm. And so you met him. You guys were selling his product, and what happened after that?
Well, he offered me a job, and then I started working for them out of London, Ontario.
Wow, I didn't know that part.
Yeah, I worked there for almost 2 years with him and with the team there, working on design stuff and hanging out and selling it. And, it was kind of a fun thing, but Mike, is a very eccentric kind of guy. Part of the job was having to fly with him in his plane
Yes.
in a while. And, he used to be so distracted when he flew. You never know if you're going to get tangled up in power lines or anything, because he was always looking the other way. And he always looked, and I remember this one time he says, "You got to go to this restaurant." And we said, "Let's go." We got in a plane, and I'm hanging on for dear life, and he's flying around, and it's, like going in a roller coaster, only it's a plane up and down. And then he comes in for a landing on a grass field, and there's like telephone wires right across it. And he lands, and I mean, honest to God, I was sweating bullets just landing. And of course, didn't have much of an appetite when I went in that restaurant, because then I knew I was going to have to leave, off that field. So he comes with a lot of baggage, But he was a great guy. He and I were always good friends.
So what was the next chapter? What happened after
The
that?
next chapter after that is I wanted to do something on my own, and I moved to New York, and I met this guy named Bert Cohen, a company called Great White Whale, and he hired me to do a few designs for him. And I designed a speaker system for him, a subwoofer satellite system he sold. And then I designed a couple things for him, and it was fun doing that. I like speakers, but I really like amplifiers a lot better, because speakers, are so competitive. I mean, you can build a speaker and use all the science you want to build, and then some guy can go and put 3 drivers in a box and buy the crossover on the internet, and all of a sudden he's competing with you, because people really can't hear that well in many cases. So speakers are just, any guy can make a wooden box and put 3 drivers in it, or 2 driver, and make
So,
sound. They think they're an engineer.
so you know that Jay is currently doing exactly that.
Oh God.
You told me you were making speakers.
Yeah, it's a hobby. I'm not competing with anyone.
Well, there's so many nice measurement tools to do speakers with. And I still have, I mean, I was enthralled with a piece of test equipment back in the 70s that was really expensive for the time. It was like $10,000. And it was an analog spectrum analyzer that basically went from 20,000 to like 100,000 cycles. But when you design a crossover, you can get a hold of one of those, Jay. It's a 3580A, and you could probably buy them for $300 or $400. But what they have in the back is a sweep generator. So you can take spectrums and you can plug that into your amplifier and drive the speaker, and at the same time measure it, and you can see the spectrum analysis of where the drivers cross over. And back when I was at Krell, I used that technique, and I made some really awesome speakers using that technique without doing any of the FFT stuff, because most of the stuff with speakers is how the 2 or 3 drivers align with each other when at the crossover point. And with the spectrum analyzer, like those old analog ones and a good microphone, you can see that stuff in real time, which really lets you adjust some of the phase angles and stuff that might show up. And just doing that and matching the levels, you have a really awesome speaker.
Awesome,
So,
thank you.
there you go. Go looking on the internet. It's HP3580A.
Well, remember, Audio Control made something similar as well. It was a handheld.
They made a spectrum analyzer.
That's right.
Analyzer, but forgot what you call them, real-time analyzer. So it just showed you a bunch of LEDs. It showed you that, but a spectrum analyzer actually shows you within sections and shows you where the 2 drivers, where one comes in and the other one goes out, and you can see the actual changeover. And that's the most important thing with designing speaker, is how the crossovers lap over on one another. And you find yourself doing some weird things, with 12 and 18 dB per octave slopes to make those things look right. So speakers are funny and they're fun, because now there's so much things you and work on. But back when I was doing that, none of that existed. But I still have that piece of Testacrum, and in fact, I just used it on the phono stage of our integrated amplifier. I make an inverse curve, and I run that sweep generator, and what I want to see in the spectrum analyzer in an absolute straight line. So that's kind of what how you design stuff. And I like those old analog things. I understand them well. The new digital stuff I have to read about.
So then you made these speakers, and then but you said your heart was still with amplifiers.
Right.
So what made that leap into?
Well, I looked around at the amplifier arena. Of course, the big names in the industry were Mark Levinson and Threshold, and then there was a bunch of products that never really did much in the market, like Electro Research and those kind of products. They were really good products, but they weren't marketed right, and the dealers didn't have many dealers. So I went and looked at those products, and I really liked the Threshold products. I liked their industrial design. And I had, for whatever reason, and I can't answer it, I had very little respect for the designs that were done at the Mark Levinson company when I actually looked at them and saw how they worked and how they sounded, and I wasn't so impressed. And I used to listen to the ML2, which was a 25-watt Class A amplifier, and it sounded pretty good, but it could only drive things like horn speakers that were like JBLs that were super efficient. So I said to myself, and this was probably around 77, 78, that, the world needs a 100-watt pure Class A amplifier. Then you can drive a lot of speakers and it'll sound nice and sweet. So that's what I set about doing. I started designing a pure Class A amplifier. And I started in 1979, and I had the first product at the 1980 CES show in Las Vegas.
Right.
I was at the Jockey Club, and I had built 3 prototypes in the basement of an old Allied elevator building in Bridgeport. Guess what? It was 1,000 square feet with heat, $200 and some dollars a month.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so that really sit well with me. So I drive from New York City to Bridgeport, Connecticut every morning, and work there all day, and then drive home late at night. so I didn't have too much of a traffic problem. But it was a really, really busy area. The day we were moving in, somebody was robbing a bank and got right across the street. It was a city bank. Someone was robbing the street, or guns were shooting, and I'm looking out the door. I said, "Wow, nice place I'm in," you know. And then I was standing out there, and a policeman came by. He said, "You see anything?" And I said, "No, I just moved here." He said, "Well, you moved to the busiest place in Connecticut." Yeah, that was fun. But it was a really cool place because across the street was a anodizer and polisher. And in the same building I was in was a machine shop. So I was able to get the first KSA 100s made with walking distance from my factory across the street and down the hall in this huge building. So that's how I was able to do it. But I built this 100-watt Class A amplifier, and I went to the show in Las Vegas, and you know, we built them by hand. Just, you know, built 3 of them, took them to the show. And at the show, I think I got about 45 orders for those things.
Oh,
You know,
huge
some
success.
distributors all over the world bought them, and everybody liked the sound and the idea. And we got back and had no idea how to put them in production. I mean, it was like a nightmare because, you know, basically when you build 3 products or build a product, it's like being a hobbyist, just like what you're going through with your speakers, right?
Yeah,
you're building a pair and you're playing with them. You're not intending that you're going to build 100 of them.
No.
And that's, I mean, your brain doesn't think that way when you're designing something. You're designing something to make it work. And I was able to build 3 and they all work the same. So good, the design works. But then somebody gives you an order for 45 and you drive back to Connecticut and you got to produce them. That is a whole different story. You know, get just the materials and the cost of doing business. So, I mean, it was pretty hand to mouth for a while. I mean, we'd build like 3 or 4 amplifiers and we'd get the money for them. And then we built 8. And then we'd get the money for 8 and we built 16. 16 took us like 2 weeks at least to build 16 of those because we didn't have much help. But, you know, as the company grew, I mean, and then I don't know, it was a real challenge because, you know, the big companies like Threshold, Mark Levinson, Audio Research, they didn't want us in their stores. You know, we were $2,200 for a 200 watt per channel pure Class A amplifier. And I think the Mark Levinson 25 watt was $6,000 a pair. And we were a stereo unit with 200 watts, 100 watts Class A with a really big power supply and separate transformers and real performance. Nobody wanted us in their store and we were nobody. So we go to a store and the guy would really like it and he wanted to keep it there. And then we'd get a phone call. Well, you know, we don't think we can sell it. And what we found out later, of course, is whatever other amplifier company he was working with, like Threshold or Mark Levinson, they tell him, you know, throw that out or we're not going to sell you anymore. So we got bounced out of a lot of stores. But, you know, in the early 80s, you drive down the East Coast and each city had probably 5 dealers in it. You know, every little city you'd stop at, there's 2 or 3 audio dealers. So you'd go to all 3 of them and eventually get a guy that didn't sell the other products and he wanted to have something. So we started getting a foothold. I spent my time driving down the East Coast, selling amplifiers, bringing the money back and building more, you know, after we built them. But we did get a foothold and it took quite a few years to build Krell up. But by 1986 and 87, you know, we were really doing okay. But then the Apogee speaker came out. And, you know, I always built amplifiers to drive Dayton rights, to be honest. You know, you remember, Adrian, that nothing, every South State amplifier broke. You know, so I said when I built this, I knew all about the load and the phase shifts and those big transforms. So I built an amplifier for sure that could drive those loads. And in fact, I made up when I did the first one, a dummy load that acted like a Dayton right. And I was able to put full power into when nothing broke. So I knew I didn't have, but when the Apogee came out, I was totally caught off guard. All of a sudden, somebody's calling me up and saying, hey, did you ever hear your amplifier with an Apogee scintilla? And I said, no. And they said, it's an incredible speaker. You got to hear it. And the full range Apogee, same thing. And they said, the only problem with the scintilla is 0.8 ohms. And they said, it seems like yours is the only amplifier that can drive it. And then Ken Kessler gets a pair of apogees, and Ricardo in England lends him a KSA 100. He writes this big review about how all the amplifiers he tried, nothing drives the speaker. And we started to grow really fast from that, because there really wasn't anything that could drive those loads. And, that really helped us. And then, Krell grew pretty good from that. And then, we changed a lot of our architecture. I had this idea. I was making amplifiers for purists. So I made this 200 watt Class A amplifier that was cooled with heat sinks, that was 24 inches across and 22 inches deep and 8 inches tall and weighed about 160 pounds. And that was my big Class A amplifier. Problem is, nobody could put it in their store. 24 inches across, it wouldn't fit in a rack. You had to put it on the floor. It got real hot. And, we sold a lot of those, but we got a lot of, dealers saying, look, we can't sell them. They're too big for the racks. You got to do something. And then so I went around to the United States and I interviewed a bunch of people about what they wanted in an amplifier. And I talked to them, and then I came back and I started to work with my couple engineers that worked for me. We came up with the KSA 250 and the KSA 150, which were all those things. And I don't know if you remember the ad, Adrian, that used a picture of the KSA 250 and a jackhammer. And we said it did 6.5 horsepower. And it was one of those amplifiers that could drive anything. And we made a matching preamp for the 250 and a matching preamp for the 150. There's 4 products, and we took off. We virtually in 2 years with those products tripled in size. So we were doing really well. Those products just crossed all the political barriers of the thresholds and the Mark Levinsons, because so many people wanted them. And never had so many people call me up on anything that I've ever been involved with and wanting to buy one for themselves. Magazine reviewers, speaker manufacturers, guys who just wanted to have one that were in the business. So we sold a lot of those amplifiers. I really couldn't build them as fast as we had orders.
Those were the amplifiers with the stepped handles in the front,
Right,
were they not?
front, yeah.
I remember,
They
yeah.
had the first blue LED.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
blue LEDs were not possible then. So I always wanted a blue LED. So there's no internet in those days. So I'm looking through the Thomas Register on LED manufacturers. So I'm going down, I'm calling them all. Can you make a blue? And everybody says no. So then I call this company, CREE, Cree, they make light bulbs now, right? LED light bulbs. Well, back then they were making one product. It was a blue LED that was used for measuring tissue in cancer patients, because all the blue light had magnetic resonance because it was made by a laser. But an LED doesn't have any of that, so they don't get any movement of the molecules, because the LED doesn't have magnets. So they made these blue LEDs, and they were extremely focused. If you look straight at it, you could see it, and if you move your head a little bit, it went right out. So I asked him, how much are those? He said, well, they're about $500 each. And I said, I can't do that. I said, you must have rejects. Oh, we got lots of rejects. I said, but if I bought the rejects, can you sandblast the front so they're not clear, so that the blue LED light will shine through all the edges? He said, sure. I said, so how much can I buy those for? He said, $11 each. So I said, okay, I'll buy all your rejects. And I said, I want all your rejects. So I just had this big pile of blue LEDs. And I said, you can't sell them to anybody in my industry. So he didn't. So all the rejects he sold to me. I got guys from Macintosh. I got guys from Crown. Can you send me one blue LED? We want to put it in our own product. I said, no. So it was really cool, because people had a blue LED for on. It was really, believe it or not, I'm sure I sold amplifiers because of the blue LED.
Wait. So Dan, that means that you're to blame for all the blue LEDs that I've been staring at for all these years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was the first one to do the blue. Yeah, that's for sure.
One of the things that I've always been intrigued by, Dan, is that you were always extremely innovative. It seemed like at the time when the audio industry was growing by leaps and bounds, um, your company, Krell, at the time seemed to always have something new and interesting developing, whether it's an innovation on Class A or pushing real hard on the concept of differential balance, the cost technology that you came up with, and digital, which we'll get to in a moment. What kept giving you these inspiration, the inspiration to do these kinds of things on a regular basis when pretty much everybody else was either doing the same thing or little modifications here and there and charging a lot more, like a lot of companies, but we won't talk about them. What gave you these kinds of ideas and inspiration?
Because to be honest with you guys, I've never had to work a day in my life because my whole life is audio and it's like my hobby, my passion. So I think about stuff, when I start forcing balanced inputs on products and balanced outputs, I knew that was the right thing to do, and there was years and years, studios and recordings, everybody had balance except high-end audio. High-end audio had a horrible little RCA jack and all those crazy connectors that were made up, and it made hot before ground when you plugged it in, so it buzzed and snapped, and you had to turn everything off. And all my circuits were balanced circuits, but I'm running them single-ended. So I just said one day, I said, look, let's just run this thing balanced. Let's put a balanced connector on it, and let's balanced in and balanced out. And we started doing that. Everybody came up and said, oh, why are you doing this? And I said, well, if you look at the science of it, you get 6 dBs of gain right off the bat when you plug it in balanced, and you get like 3 dBs less noise. I mean, come on, that's free, and a signal really is a balance. It's really not, audio signals shouldn't be tied to ground. It bounces, it moves evenly, plus and minus. And if you have both spectrums plus and minus on the input, it just seems natural. So I pushed on that. And another thing back in those days, noise was a big factor, and that's why we started with balance. But then, at the time we were working in the current domain, and we would build circuits that were current gain only, no voltage gain, and then right at the end we would switch it to voltage gain to go from the preamp to the amplifier. And then I said one day to my group of engineers, I said, look, why don't we just go out of the preamp in current, go to the amplifier in current, and have one voltage gain stage for everything. So when we did that, of course, the noise floor dropped dramatically, and that's where CAS came from. And that idea was great because you could run that for quarter of a mile without any signal degradation. So it was pretty cool stuff. To be honest with you, we used a LEMO connector to connect it up, but the fact is you can use a Cat6 connector, with that cheap wire like you do internet. It would have worked fine with that. But everybody didn't want that because they said, if you put that in, nobody's going to think it's high end. You can't use that. But I liked it, because the original patent on application for that, we took 1,000 feet of twisted pair 22 gauge wire and put the signal in one side and took it out the other, and there was no distortion change. And when we did it with balance, it was like 50% distortion. So I knew that I could use telephone wire, and everybody got really mad at me at my company, all the marketing guys, because I can't do that. Nobody's going to want to use that. Can't just put a LEMO on it, and so that the wire companies could because when somebody says, oh, why are you using this really cheap wire and it's high-end audio? So it didn't work. I mean, I like to do things because they work. and it was really simple and really, super, easy. Anybody could buy it and put it on. But it turned out that we put the limo on, and that's just kind of the story of that cast. And in D'Agostino, I use a similar technology, but in the voltage domain. And in the output of our preamp and the input of our amplifier, they kind of shake hands in a similar way. You can use any preamp with my amplifier and any amplifier with my preamp, but when you put my amplifier in my preamp, you'll notice that things get really quiet. And that's part of that technology, but I did it in a more universal way. So any balanced cable you use will give you the same effect.
So
I kind of make it more practical.
Coming back to the days of Krell, so with regards to innovation, one of the things in the digital world back in the 80s, I guess, when digital started to really take off, Krell had a separate division, Krell Digital, and you came up with some quite fascinating DA converters. And back then, of course, the players were Theta and Wadia, and then Krell came with a digital computer, it's called the reference 64 and so on. Talk a little bit about that, because while Krell has always been well known for its amplifiers, I think that the digital stuff in some ways was perhaps even more innovative because it required um, advancing into technologies that heretofore had never been seen before.
Well, it's kind of an interesting story. I lived in a little town called Madison in Connecticut before we started Krell Digital, and my son Brett, who's passed away, he had a friend, name was JR, and his father was a digital engineer. So JR said, well, hey, why don't I introduce you to my father? So I met his father, Jim, and we start talking about digital audio. And he said, I have this idea. And we started talking about it. And it sounded like it was going to be super expensive to accomplish. And it was. But I decided that I'd start a company called Krell Digital, and I'd take in some outside investors to invest in it. So I did. And that's how Krell Digital got started. But my instinct was correct. It cost us $1 million to build that back in those days. And it was a groundbreaking product. It was the first time anybody, Wadia talked about oversampling, but their oversampling was really done in adding 4 16-bit DACs together and get 64 times oversampling. But in reality, it was actually only 16 times, because the way they added the current, which was with a resistor in between each DAC, you can't add current like that. So really, it was really a 16 times, but they made a big deal of adding the 4 16-bit DACs, and they had 64 times. We actually had 64 times in software. We were running 4 DSP, which is a brand new product. We worked with Motorola directly. They had engineers working at my factory for 6 months because nobody was using the 56,000 in audio, and we wanted to use it. We had 4 of them running at like 40% faster clock speed than they were made to run, and they were smoking hot. And there were 4 of them on the board, and we were running it, and we really could do 64 times oversampling in audio in the digital domain and come out with the stream that was uninterrupted. But I'll tell you how hot they were. In the first ones, we had the board running, and I pushed down on I touched the DAC to see how hot it was, and I had Motorola 56,000 tattooed on my thumb. That's how hot they were running, and
wow.
It was pretty wild. And that was an awesome sounding thing for the time. Nobody had anything like that, but we couldn't get the magazines to cooperate. You remember Audio Magazine and stuff, and they had both units, and they tested them, and they realized, ours was really truly 64 and the Wadia was questionable, but they would never come out and say it, and we couldn't get the kind of traction we wanted, but we did pretty well with that company. We came out with the top loading CD player with the plexiglass cover. And
The MD1.
yeah, with that in the 64, that was a great looking and great
Oh,
concept.
that's an iconic transport. Philip, do you remember that? The Krell
Yep,
MD1?
yep.
Yeah, that was a I called it a CD turntable.
Oh, it's gorgeous. That to this day is one of those iconic
Yeah.
audio pieces. You know, you put the cover down and it slowly closes,
Yeah,
right?
I know what it looks like. I've been hunting for one, so
Stunning piece, absolutely
yeah.
stunning piece. Yeah, yeah. And I remember the ones that followed. They had electroluminescent technology built
Right.
into the lucite, right? So when you press play, the lucite cover would actually become what's the word, fogged up, so no light would get into the
Right.
actual
Yeah,
well,
so close it
right?
off. The
It was
electronic shutter. And inside there, when you turned it on, we had a reciprocal color from the LED, the red LED. We had special LEDs inside there that turned on when you dropped the cover that uh, bathed the bottom of the CD itself in green light to short out the bouncing effect from the laser. And we didn't think you could hear it, but you actually could hear it. It was subtle, but you could hear when those turned on. It was pretty cool. And we did a lot of innovative things with that.
Well, I also remember your laser mechanism was embedded into a block of metal,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
that it would just add more inertia to any kind of vibration or any kind of mechanical movement.
yeah. We did a lot with that isolation in those days because that was a big deal. Interesting enough, even the weight that held the CD down made a difference in the sound. And our CD drive was really we beefed it up. We built all analog power supplies. There's no digital power supplies in any of our equipment, so we were able to get the lasers to behave and the tracking mechanisms to work really, really linear because they have really high current analog supplies. But and we were one of the first people to use a crystal lock. We used a ST. What was it?
What they call the AT&T glass optical.
AT&T glass
Yes.
ST. You could lock the clock in the processor to the transport, and that made a difference. That was really cool. So we did a lot of innovative stuff with digital. Eventually, we wound up making our own DAC on the KPS 25, the integrated player with the amplifier in it and all. That was some of the best sounding stuff. Even the analog parts of it were really amazing sounding. And that unit, we had built our own DAC. So that was all discrete DAC, and it really was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I remember. I would go to CES all excited to see what you guys had come up with, and I was always uh, very happy because you never fail to amaze. There's always something new, and then that one year when you took the cover off and you had this ginormous Krell monoblocks, the MRAs, the master reference amplifiers, that
Right.
were, if you stood it on its face, was like a refrigerator. This thing was
Right.
huge.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a fun thing. That was a fun project. Yeah.